Okay, so obviously, guys, we have Councilwoman Shama Sawant here to talk about this. Really, like, it's been months and months since this has been happening, but this attempt to recall her, and she is fighting the establishment. Shama was somebody that started the Fight for 15 back years ago in Seattle, and has been really prominent in criticizing Amazon and actually joining in on some of the protests last year that took place after George Floyd was murdered. And it's been really kind of a historical thing because Shama belongs to the Socialist Alternative Party, and unlike in other types of government office, it's actually, when you run for city council, it is possible. We've had Greens here in city council. We have Green mayors. So when you are a candidate that isn't in the Democratic Party and you are part of the city council, it takes on a whole other heap of different things. You're going to be entirely opposed, entirely targeted by the establishment. And this is a story right now where the Washington State Supreme Court has allowed the recall campaign against Shama Sawant to continue. So today we have Shama here in the studio via, of course, internet, to talk about this situation and to ask her so many questions that her experience organizing is unprecedented. Thank you, Shama, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so yeah, you want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, we just heard news. There was breaking news that the Washington State Supreme Court is now allowing the recall campaign against you, Shama. What are your initial thoughts, and what is your plan on what you're going to do?
Thank you for asking me about that. The ruling is from the state Supreme Court is completely unjust, but we are not surprised because working people in oppressed communities know we cannot rely on capitalist courts for justice any more than we can on the police. And as you were just alluding to, many working people saw this firsthand last summer across the country as peaceful protests against racist police brutality were themselves met with brutal police violence. And while the police and the political establishment have not been held accountable, in stark contrast, more than 14,000 Black Lives Matter protesters were arrested. And I was one of those protesters. And it's no accident that 2 of the 3 charges upheld by the Supreme Court are about my participation in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And ultimately, because we've used our office as a way to organize social movements. And, to see how stunning this ruling from the Supreme Court is, I think it's important to note that in October of last year, this same Washington State Supreme Court unanimously threw out the grassroots recall of Amazon's mayor, Seattle's mayor, but she's really Amazon's mayor, Democrat Jenny Durkan, who oversaw the vicious police crackdown against Seattle protesters. Now, among other dangerous weapons, Seattle police, just like Minneapolis and other cities, police under Durkan used tear gas during a respiratory pandemic. Tear gas inflames the lungs, burns the skin, and stings the eyes. Its use has the potential to increase the spread of coronavirus and to cause long-term harm in individuals with asthma and other respiratory conditions. Democratic establishments like Durkan's continued unleashing tear gas for weeks, despite repeated public pleas by medical and public health professionals to stop its use, especially during COVID. That was the charge from a grassroots recall campaign against this corporate mayor, which we supported. And yet this Supreme Court unanimously ruled that that recall's objection to the use of tear gas really represented a quote unquote political disagreement with Durkan and therefore did not have merit and summarily dismissed the case. Now that same Supreme Court has unanimously approved the recall against Seattle's only elected socialist because we held a masked 1-hour peaceful Black Lives Matter rally in an empty city hall. But really, the Supreme Court's reason for siding with the recall is highly political. It is an attack not just on me, but on our office for unambiguously standing with BLM. And it's an attack on the movement as a whole. And I'll just say this, the stunning irony is that I was one of the thousands who was tear gassed by Durkan's police. So absolutely, we need an all-out fight back against this recall. We have to recognize that it is one of the worst attacks on the US left in decades. And everybody who is watching this, who considers themselves progressive, let alone socialist, has a stake in joining us and defeating this recall. So we are organizing citywide through a solidarity campaign against the recall, but we are also appealing for national and even international solidarity.
So do you intend to go to the Court of Appeals and appeal the decision?
We are talking to our attorney about that, but we cannot hold our breath that they will give us any justice, because we know that's not going to come. They've already made it very clear, these Supreme Court judges, where they stand. And also we have to keep in mind that the recall law in Washington state itself, to begin with, is profoundly undemocratic, and it allows the unequal application of the law. It is well suited for retaliation against working people's representatives. And this law in this state, the recall law, does not require that the charges even be proven true. The truth does not matter, literally. And when I tell people this, people are stunned, like, how can that be? How can that be the case? But it truly is. The Washington state recall law does not require recall charges to be true. It just requires the charges to be stated, that if they were true, then they would be liable for recall, which is just an attack against working people's representatives.
Yeah. Well, City Councilwoman Sawant, you're one of the more popular political heads in Seattle. If it does go to a recall, are you confident that you will win and you'll be okay? Or do you have a little nervousness with what could happen with the election system there?
It's all of that. Throughout history and throughout our experience of 7.5 years in organizing and winning unheard of victories in Seattle, we have seen that neither victory nor defeat is ever guaranteed to social movements. It's all a question of how we fight back. So neither should we be demoralized, nor should we get complacent. There is no question that we have huge support, not only from our district and citywide, but also statewide and nationally. It is precisely because working people have been hungry for this kind of politics, politics that actually stands up for them, fights for them unrelentingly, which is what you need, and not a go along to get along politician who says all the right things for working people and then goes and sells out. And our city hall is full of those progressive Democrats who say all the right things, but are ready to sell out unless we have a fighting movement. Just this past Monday, I have to tell you, we won a really crucial victory where we forced a unanimous vote in City Hall to ensure that tenants facing eviction have the right to a lawyer. How incredibly important is this, as we head into a tsunami of evictions. But that was not guaranteed. I mean, Seattle City Hall has 8 progressive Democrats, quote unquote, and 1 socialist. And yet, there was only 1 reliable vote for this mine. And then we had to fight tooth and nail against their opposition. And when they were exposed and they could no longer vote no, then they tried to insert insidious loopholes. So all of this took a fight.
Yeah. What does it mean, by the way, for Seattle with the unanimous vote to guarantee city residents the right to an attorney during eviction proceedings? What does that mean for Seattle? Because here in LA, of course, we are witnessing the same thing right now. Yesterday, we covered somebody who was evicted and is now living in their car. I mean, this situation is out of control. What does that mean for your residents?
You're so right. This is an unprecedented crisis that our people are facing in city after city, in metropolitan areas across the nation. So what you're describing for Los Angeles, that is exactly the situation we face in Seattle. It's an extremely wealthy city, but it's also extremely divided, where the wealthy have gotten wealthier and working people and the poor have found it difficult to even have a foothold in this city. And if you look at the statistics in Seattle, we see that 9 out of 10 evictions result in homelessness. So if you look at that stark statistical link between getting evicted and becoming homeless, you can see that having a lawyer is so crucial. And then you can see the statistics also of how eviction hearings go when you have a lawyer or when you don't have a lawyer. The ACLU's data shows that nationally, 90% of landlords have a lawyer when they go to court, to have tenants evicted, and 10% of tenants have lawyers with them. So having or not having a lawyer can be a make or break whether you get evicted or you get to keep a roof over your head as a tenant. And if you get to keep a roof over your head and ward off an eviction, it means you don't become homeless. And so given all those statistical links, it is a crucial thing. Just having a lawyer will be a preventer of homelessness. And that is why the next battleground that we are building for in my office, we've already released this legislation yesterday actually, is a bill to make sure that families with school-age children and educators in the school district are not evicted during a school year. Because again, we see horrendous links between housing instability and the detrimental effects on student learning and mental health.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I would just think it's amazing that you're doing that. We've been talking about that you have like a 90% chance better to avoid eviction if you have a lawyer. Can you give us just a little bit of a take on the schematics of things, of how you're going to pull that off? Like, how are you going to provide everybody a chance, all the indigenous residents, a lawyer? I mean, how are you going to get that done? That seems like, how would they do that? Were they going to get volunteers to be lawyers to volunteer?
Because we could learn a lot to replicate that here in the city of Los Angeles. We're experiencing, we'll talk about, I'll ask you about that in a minute, but it's like the housing crisis has become 10 times worse with COVID and the pandemic. There are tents everywhere, and the city council here is actually evicting people from parks and doing raids instead of actually doing anything to help them.
You're totally right. And in fact, that's one of the most stunning things about an indictment on the capitalist system, that even during a pandemic moratorium on evictions, landlords are still issuing eviction notices. Evictions are happening. We just heard in our office this tragic story of a woman who was being foreclosed on. So it's both homeowners, working class homeowners, and working class renters who are going to start paying the price. And it's a repeat, unfortunately, of the Great Recession, unless we really fight to make sure that the cost of the recession and the pandemic is paid for by the billionaire class, by the corporate landlords, by big banks, and by big businesses, and not by working people, whether it's renters or homeowners. And so, in fact, the fight that culminated in Monday's victory, actually, we've been waging for over 3 years. And ever since I got elected in took office in 2014, we launched what has been called the People's Budget Movement, which is against this whole corporatized budget, and to ensure full funding of our needs. And of course, that is an ongoing fight. But through the People's Budget Movement as a vehicle, every year we have won victories that were considered impossible for working people to win. And one of the things we won 3 years ago was the first ever funding from the city, public revenues, for a lawyer for tenants facing eviction. So, it really started there, where we forced the city through the People's Budget Movement to contract with this organization called the Housing Justice Project. The Housing Justice Project is trained attorneys who are truly dedicated. They're not there to make money. They're salaried individuals who are affiliated with the King County Bar Association, who work out of the King County Courthouse, and who represent tenants and who have experience representing tenants, and their success rate is incredible. So I have no doubt that there are attorneys like that in Los Angeles as well, who are willing to do this work for tenants. And the attorneys at the Housing Justice Project in Seattle and King County tell us that most private lawyers don't provide this service. It's lawyers who are dedicated to social service, to public service, who do that. And that's how we accomplish. So 3 years ago, we won the funding for one such attorney from the Housing Justice Project. The next year, we won more. Last year, we won even more. And then this year, we have made it a law. So the city has to fund these attorneys at the Housing Justice Project or at some other organization, maybe in the future, who will provide these services for tenants.
Wow, that's impressive. And
I wonder what the budget is.
Yeah, we could really learn a lot from that. You mentioned that the progressive Democrats haven't been much help, as an understatement, right? But how has your experience been as a socialist in the city council compared to the stipulations of being tied to the Democratic Party?
I think that is a major part of the lessons that the left, especially the socialist left, should learn from our experience. This is for the collective experience and education. The lessons we have learned is that you absolutely have to be crystal clear. When you get elected as a socialist or as a working class representative, your job is not to merely advocate for progressive policies, which absolutely it's your job. Your job is not merely to vote the right way, which absolutely, hell yes, that is part of your job. But your job goes, your task as an elected representative for working people goes well beyond that, and that is to expose the way that the corporate political machinery works. And so that is the basis on which we were able to win $15 an hour. And part of what I mean by that, I mean, it's twofold. One is, first of all, understanding that your power as a working people's representative does not lie inside City Hall. So you don't win $15 an hour by endlessly making a good argument, showing data to the Democrats, saying, look, this will be a good thing for working people to do. Of course, we do that. But that's not where our power lies. Our power lies outside the halls of capitalist government and with the people. So one of the first things we did when we got into office, we meaning myself and activists, I speak plural because I want to make it crystal clear to people. It is not about me or my special qualities. It's about how we are willing to use our office as socialist alternative as an organ of collective struggle. And so as soon as we were elected, we launched what we call the 15 Now grassroots movement. This 15 Now movement organized, and it was a very highly democratically organized movement where the leadership of the movement, including myself, were directly accountable to thousands of people who got to vote, debate on and vote on key issues for the $15 minimum wage. We organized action conferences, neighborhood action groups. We organized marches and rallies on the street. We brought the people to City Hall. And that is how we converted a 1 vote for $15 into a 9 vote for $15. All these council members who had sworn against 15 were forced to vote yes because of the power of social movements. But it's not just rhetoric and hyperbole about movements. It's about actually understanding how we built that movement. And one of the key components of successful movement building is to make the leadership of movements, whether you're an elected council member or not, I don't care about that. If you're a leader of movements, you need to be held accountable by the people you claim to represent, whether you have a formal title or not. And so having a democratically organized movement is what helped us to overcome not only the opposition of the Democrats, it also helped us to overcome the cautious instincts of pro-establishment, pro-democratic labor leaders who, I don't care where your heart lies. If you're not willing to fight for working people, then your heart is of no use to working people. You know what I mean? It's not good enough for you to get a decent paycheck and pension and vacation time if you're not willing to put yourself on the line to win the same things for tens of thousands, millions of working people in this rich country. So that's the kind of accountability we are talking about. And that only comes from having a movement where the rank and file of the movement are empowered to make sure that we demand this. And it is that kind of rank and file empowerment, that model that allowed us to win 15, because we had to overcome the cautious instincts of movement leaders and NGO leaders as well. And that is how we won the Amazon tax last year to fund social housing and the Green New Deal, once again, with a powerful movement that is democratically organized, where people directly vote on things. But also, it's about tactics. So both 15 Now and Amazon tax, we were able to win because we built a credible ballot initiative threat, telling City Council, if you don't vote yes on this measure legislatively, we are going to take it to the voters directly. It was the threat of a credible ballot initiative that put the fear in big business and their political representatives in the Democratic Party, that forced them to vote yes. But they will hesitate to, they will be loath to admit this publicly, because how the Democratic Party functions is they will fight you against progressive policies every inch of the way. And then when they're forced to concede, they'll say, oh, we did this. We were going to do this. Anyway, we don't need a rabble-rousing socialist to tell us what to do. But big business are more honest sometimes. Your enemies sometimes give you the best compliments.
Right.
They made it very clear. It is the army of ordinary people that has come to City Hall that is forcing these changes in Seattle. And it is nothing special about Seattle. Such movements can be built everywhere.
Wow. Wow.
She forced the vote on this issue.
I know, and just that talk
did.
of saying, like, if you're not willing to fight for the people, get the hell out of the way. You walk the walk and talk the talk. Okay, so let's talk about the Democratic Party being unreliable. You said that in that tweet, talking about how Seattle cannot rely on the Democrats, even the progressive ones. So if we can't rely on the Democratic Party, is there a pathway for anti-imperialism and socialism electorally on the higher level, on the next level?
Yes, there is a pathway, but it's going to be difficult. And I think that is part of the crux of the debate on the U.S. left right now is people are daunted by what it will take to actually go in an anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist direction. And then they fall back on the idea of just putting all your eggs in the Democratic basket because otherwise it seems daunting. So what is the specific pathway? It absolutely is going to require us on the left, social movements, mass movements, the labor movement, for us to fight for a political organization of our own, a party for working people. We will need this because as long as we are tied to the Democratic establishment, it's not going to work. And I think you mentioned force the vote. I think that is a very crucial component of this discussion because I mean, first of all, we have to recognize, of course, that hundreds of socialist left elected representatives being elected around the nation, that's a positive phenomenon. It's a reflection of the sign of the times. It's a reflection that people are ready for something different. So overall, the election of the squad Congress members is a very positive thing. However, that can't be, we cannot say, oh, we did this, we elected AOC, and now we should not criticize AOC, and this is where the buck stops. We cannot have that because what we are seeing unfold, and this is a big part of political education nationally on the left, is we're seeing that the strategy of being left and tweeting the correct things about Medicare for all and criticizing Republicans and voting the right way yourself, that is not going to cut it. This is not going to get the job done if we want to win a federal $15 minimum wage, if we want to win Medicare for all, if we want to tax Wall Street to fund university education and cancel student debt. None of these major reforms are going to be won on the basis of that strategy, let alone deeper fundamental change away from capitalism that's going to be needed to fight the climate catastrophe. And so, during the stimulus bill, a big debate that came up, and I think it was more clarifying because at first there was a section of the left that wanted to reject the force the vote tactic for Medicare for all, but then they saw and this is important, what we saw happening during the stimulus vote is that, wait a second, this debate is going to happen again and again and again. What will it take for us to have a militant elected representative or more in Congress who will absolutely hold the line? That's the question that was raised. And so many of us, including Socialist Alternative and I, we were really advocating for the squad members to withhold their vote from the stimulus bill until 15 was put back in the stimulus bill. Now that's the kind of fighting tactic that you will need, and it will not just be about 15. When the force the vote debate happened, everybody said, including AOC. AOC famously tweeted about this, sort of condescending to saying that this is not where the battle lies. Let's go for winnable things like $15 an hour. Well, then what happened to $15 an hour?
Yeah.
Again, So what my point is, it's not about questioning intentions of the squad. I think they are extremely well intentioned. The point is, what is the strategy that actually works? And that strategy that actually works will require them to be in the face of the Democratic establishment. It is not going to work by tweeting and voting the right way. As long as you're going to put your faith in Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, as long as you're not willing to go against them, it is not going to work. But going against them is, again, it's not just to create some individual drama in the halls of Congress. What we were saying is that they should withhold their vote until 15 is put back in the stimulus bill, and then turn to the people. Organize mass rallies and conferences. For example, what a specific thing that I was arguing for is that the squad should call for mass rallies in West Virginia and Arizona. You want to talk about Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin? Well, let them face the wrath of their own people. Joe Manchin goes to the mat for big business. We have to go to the mat for our people. And there is plenty of people in West Virginia, in Georgia, in Arizona, who want to fight for $15 an hour, who want to fight for Medicare for all. Black, white, Latino can be united in this struggle, but that's not going to happen unless our leaders are willing to use their positions to mobilize that action.
One of the frustrations of the progressive left, or the socialists, or us in general, is that the squad has failed to use their popularity. People like AOC, she has 12.5 million or more followers on Twitter. One of the things we were calling for is a rally or a protest, a sit-in, a demand on the ground, because that is what is going to be seemingly required to force the politicians to anything. You actually are able to do both. You don't just push things electorally. You actually go out there and get the people out in the streets to fight that. What can we do to get more of these people in Congress to emulate what you do? And what, it's not about you. I 100% agree, but it's about leadership and taking the initiative to say, hey, we have a large following on social media. People look up to us. Why don't we go out there, march in the streets and form a protest to get $15, to get healthcare during a pandemic? It would have seemed like the perfect time to demand such things.
Absolutely. There was no better time to actually, for example, push for Medicare for all in the middle of a pandemic, when people have seen just the unspeakable failure of capitalism to save lives. Literally people have died because we did not have protections. And so I totally agree with you. There is no better time than now. And as far as, what can we do to begin this kind of action? I think it has to begin with many of us on the left who agree that this needs to be done, and whether we have elected office or not, we have to play that leadership role. And I totally agree with you that it does come down to, it is not about individuals, but it does come down to leadership. I don't actually, you will never catch me saying things like leadership does not matter or that movements are spontaneous. Yes, the anger is not something we create. Like the desire for $15 an hour is not something that I manufactured or socialist alternative manufactured. The anger against capitalism is there because that's the lived reality of people. That's why 26 million people came out in the Black Lives Matter protest. But we have to do a sober assessment. And those of us who take politics and the need for fundamental change seriously, we have to be sober about, for example, what are the concrete achievements of our Black Lives Matter movement. All of us marched on the streets, but what was lacking is a clear leadership that can provide the way forward. And that leadership has to come from us. If it's not coming from prominent people, then we have to fight for that leadership. And actually the conversation like this is part of building that leadership, because there are so hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people out there who will agree with us. I mean, just to give you a concrete example that is not from Seattle is, we know that just 3 years ago, the teachers in West Virginia won a historic victory by carrying out phenomenal strike action in a right to work state, in a Republican and right-wing dominated state. And the way they did that was precisely the kind of approach that Socialist Alternative has used here, which is that understanding that rank and file leaders of individual sort of branches of their union had the responsibility to stand up for other teachers and for the community, for students, for children, by pushing back against any deal that they didn't agree with from the union leadership. And so we saw that rally where the statewide union leader is announcing this deal that they had made with the Republican legislature, and he was booed by the rank and file of the teachers union. And the rank and file leaders decided to continue the strike action. They defied that higher leadership and they carried this out. So that's the kind of defiance and militancy we're going to need in our social movements, whether it is Black Lives Matter or Medicare for All. We will need that inside the labor movement as well. And so, obviously all eyes are on Bessemer, Alabama, where workers are fighting for their first unionizing battle in an Amazon warehouse. And obviously we have to do everything in our power when as their vote goes through. And we hope for a good result, but whether the union is, the union is a yes vote or a no vote right now. The point is that the fight back needs to continue. And so the kind of leadership we have shown in Seattle, we will need on a much bigger scale. And I'll tell you something, I completely reject this false dichotomy that some people who support the Democratic Party have, that, well, you did it in Seattle, but you can't do this in Congress, you can't do this in the labor movement. No, absolutely. Not only can we do, we have to, otherwise we are doomed. How are we going to fight the climate catastrophe and save the planet unless we take pride in building a militant struggle? We have no choice but to do that. We have to. And people who feel that this is too daunting, well, yes, it is daunting, but one, it is worth fighting for. And second, if you keep going back to the Democratic Party, we know that strategy doesn't work. That's insanity. Trying something that has shown a result and then expecting a different result.
Yeah. Well, you've said throughout this interview today what the left needs to do, you're a socialist and stuff. There are a lot of conservative people on the right who are poor working class people. How do we make a bridge to those people to get over and join our fight if we're so concentrated, though, on just saying the left? Because I think there's a lot of solidarity there and a lot of people who are suffering, too, with their working conditions that might join us in this fight.
That is a spot-on question. I'm so glad you asked. And when I say the left, I don't necessarily mean to exclude those people. In fact, the whole point is to, and the only way to build a strong left and a militant movement, whether it's in labor or on the streets, is by actually building working class solidarity. And this is a serious question. The question you asked is a serious question for the left, because one, we're not going to build the kind of mass movements we need without really winning over a lot of the people who are not part of movements already. And furthermore, while Trump was correctly repudiated, I mean, the vote against Trump, defeating Trump in the election, was a strong repudiation by American people to his reactionary anti-worker agenda. But Trumpism hasn't gone anywhere. Right populism, the danger of right populism remains as long as we don't have a challenge to corporate politics. So in other words, as long as the left doesn't build a mighty, struggle nationwide, it will be left to, the vacuum will be left for right populist forces to take ground. And that will be very, very dangerous. We've already seen through the Trump era what happened. And so a serious question for the left is, over 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. Unless we're going to have a ludicrous position that they are all irredeemable reactionaries, which they are not, then we need a strategy of winning them over. Yeah. And I think we saw a glimpse of that through the response to Bernie Sanders, both in 2016 and in 2020. I mean, here is the United States. It's the belly of the capitalist beast. And you have a self-described socialist, and Americans can't get enough of him. It's tens of millions of people who voted for Trump would have voted for Bernie Sanders because they are energized by the idea of a political revolution against the billionaire class. So in other words, I think we have to be clear where we have to, on the left, among socialists in our labor movement, we have to not only have a clear position against racism and sexism and xenophobia and bigotry, we have to take up the demands that are related to oppression. We have to fight for Black liberation. And at the same time, understand that there are tens of millions of Americans who could be won over, who haven't been reached out to. And that is why we have to take the fight. The fight cannot just be in Seattle and Los Angeles and Boston and New York. The fight has to go to Kentucky and Alabama and Arkansas and Mississippi, where we know there are people, as you were correctly saying, people will be open to this kind of fight back, but we have to build working class solidarity. And that is why we have to understand that at the same time, the dangers posed by identity politics, we have to go beyond that and make sure that we have working class solidarity.
Just to wrap up, one of the things that wasn't around during Marx's time was the big tech, was like Silicon Valley, was the either the censorship or the mass power that companies like Google, Alphabet have overreached on people. How do we deal with leftist movements or anti-imperialist movements with this added condition of the internet and of the big tech?
I think we have to first of all, just recognize that in every era of revolt under capitalism, the technologies will be different. So you're absolutely correct in everything you described. But fundamentally, I would say what hasn't changed is the fact that whenever there is an era of revolt, there is also, equal and opposite reaction. So, there will be reactionary forces because the forces of the state are going to try and crush any kind of resistance against the status quo. And so I would say that while all of this is, as you said, is, stacked up against us, we also, what we have is a historic moment where, like never before in our lifetimes, tens of millions of people are ready to actually get organized. The faith in capitalism has never been as low as it is today. And even in this country, which is, as I said, it's a bastion of global capitalism, the entire generations of young people are disenchanted from the status quo. They see the failures of the system and they want to fight for something better. So I think on balance, I would draw a very optimistic view of this. But as I said before, nothing is guaranteed. That's why we have to fight for the correct kind of ideas. And I think part of pushing back against the forces that are arrayed against us, as you mentioned, in terms of the mass power of corporations like Google and other tech corporations, is precisely what is going on in Bessemer, Alabama. That is the organizing of gig economy workers into a militant labor movement. So not only do we need to fight for the unionization, for example, of every Amazon warehouse in the nation. That needs to be our collective goal. We all have a stake in making that happen. And in fact, that is precisely why members of Socialist Alternative are on the ground in Bessemer, Alabama. They've been there for weeks, helping to, alongside the union and the workers, to make sure that we have the best result possible. But our members in New York, to be honest, are also discussing with hundreds of JFK8, the Staten Island Amazon warehouse. Mm-hmm. We need that kind of solidarity where whether you yourself are a gig economy worker or not, we should be building bridges of unity with workers everywhere. Tech workers in Amazon have to be in solidarity and have been in solidarity with the Amazon warehouse workers and custodial workers and cafeteria workers and the security officers. All of these are workers who are exploited by capitalism. And so a unionizing struggle around the nation is definitely has to be part of the answer to the kind of forces that are against us. But it's not just, this is one last thing I'll say, it's not just unionizing though. What we have to do is to usher in an era which is like the proud militant American labor movement from the past, and reject what has dominated in the labor movement for decades, which is business unionist ideas, where the leadership of the unions is having meetings with the establishment, and then at the end of the day we have massive setbacks for union members, and also the union density has gone down. So we need a pushback against that. We need a rank and file revival of the militant labor movement.
Really quickly, Councilwoman Sawant, that was my question. Should Joe Biden drop the charges and free Julian Assange?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So thank you, Shama. That was great. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. We will, we're always talking about labor movements. Would you would you ever run for another office, and what's on your radar, and where can people find you to help you out?
Yes, I will just say that what we do in the future absolutely needs to be part of a nationwide conversation and struggle against capitalism, and a fight back on all these concrete demands that we just talked about, whether it's unionizing or Medicare for all of 15. But whether I personally will run or not, I think that is, again, a political question, both for Socialist Alternative and the larger movement that we are rooted in. In fact, that is why what we have accomplished is such an important part of the political education, I think, for millions, because when we launched the campaign in Socialist Alternative, it was not that I woke up one day and said, I want to run for office, let's build. I was just a member of Socialist Alternative, and I still am. It's an organization that is accountable to its rank and file. And so what we did was together have a democratic discussion and debate about, should we run a campaign, what the campaign's platform should be, should we emphasize $15 an hour? That was one of the key questions that was discussed. Who the candidate should be is also a democratic question. We want a pushback against this cult of personality politics where it's all about this one person and then you can't criticize them and all. Nobody is about criticism. It is about actually seriously taking the fight for a different kind of future for our people and our planet. And it is in that spirit that I pledged during the campaign, and I'm carrying this out, that I take home only the average worker's wage, and the rest of my six-figure salary after taxes goes into a solidarity fund. And part of that fund is now being used to help the Bessemer struggle for unionizing in Alabama. And right now, defeating the recall is top priority for all progressives nationwide, one of the top priorities, nationwide. And it's no surprise that they're trying to undo the election victory we had in 2019 here. Bezos and Amazon are trying to, undermine the union election in Bessemer. So, you can see that everywhere there's a reaction against working people rising up. So please go to kshamasolidarity.org, which is my first name, KSHAMA, solidarity, all one word, .org, and donate, because obviously billionaires are not donating to our campaign. Billionaires are busy donating to the recall. So we need working people to stand with us, and we need endorsements from labor and social movement leaders from around the country.
Yeah. Convo Couch has your back. I love what you said. They got to take it to the mat. Kshama Sawant, amazing guest.
Kshama, thank you.
Sawant, I'm so sorry.
Kshama, thank you very much for coming on. We appreciate it.
And good luck.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, and likewise, solidarity.
Thank you.